It is a delight to see people logging in from all over, from British Columbia, and hello, Kathy Jessup, the big sister. I'm glad I never had has logged in from Edmonton. Lovely to have you here, and people logging in from near and far. It's nice to that all of you have come here tonight. Uh, so, I guess maybe just to talk a little bit about the book. The book launch that we're launching tonight is called On This Day 365 Tales of History, Mystery, and More. This is a project I've been working on for a little while now. And as many of you know, I'm always looking for a good story, and I am constantly doing historical research for my day job and doing other research, looking for ghost stories and whatnot over the last couple of years. I think this is book 7 or something with Flanker Press, and so I've been kind of collecting stories for a long time. Um, and as I've been collecting stories, uh, I would often find things that didn't really fit in the project that I was working on at the moment. Um, I was saying to someone earlier today, we have this really great resource here in the province, which is the Memorial University Digital Archives Initiative. And the digital archives is a repository of digital information. So things like the Newfoundland Quarterly and all sorts of records are there. And one of the projects that Memorial University Library has been working on for a while is the digitization of newspapers. They're a great primary resource for me, and often when I'm looking up something, I'll just continue on at the end of the paper, especially around the turn of the 20th century, late Victorian period. There was all these great little gossipy news stories in the newspapers. And having a conversation at one point with Gary Cranford, we were talking about, another book, and so I kind of pitched this idea to Flanker that I would give one of these weird little quirky news stories for every day of the year. And here we are tonight, launching this ebook in the midst of a global pandemic, which is a story that will be told 100 years from now, perhaps. We'll see. I wanted to start off tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the research and how I found stuff, but I want to just start off with the very first entry in the book. I was talking to someone today, and they asked me what my favorite story in the book is. There's 365 stories in the book, so it's hard to pick one that is your favorite. Um, but I wanted to start with January 1st because I deliberately started the book with this particular story. The structure of the book is that there is a short story for each day of the calendar year. So it has to be an event that is tied somehow to that very, very specific day. And I thought this was just a very fortuitous kind of story to start the book with that happened on January 1st. So each story, some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. This is kind of an average length story for January 1st, and it's called Definitely Not a Caribou, London, 1638. On this day, King Charles I granted a coat of arms to the Newfoundland colony. It featured 2 English lions, never seen in Newfoundland, 2 Scottish unicorns, they don't really exist, and an elk, which we also don't have, probably meant to be a caribou, and 2 rather fanciful depictions of what a 17th century Englishman thought a Beothuk might look like. Not long after, a civil war broke out in England, and everyone forgot about the Newfoundland coat of arms for almost 300 years. It was not until the 1920s that the College of Arms in London reminded Sir Edgar Baring that Newfoundland actually had a coat of arms of their own. The Newfoundland government officially adopted it on January 1st, another January 1st, 1928, only 290 years after it had been granted in the first place, which has to be some kind of bureaucratic world record. And that, in a nutshell, sets the stage for this book. Weird little pieces of half-forgotten history and folklore from all over Newfoundland and Labrador, one for every day of the year. Um, so I think that's yeah, that is kind of a good fitting story. It kind of sets the stage. And I think it's important to note that the stories in this are all reportedly true stories. Some of them are historical, some of them maybe are a little anecdotal, but they are all from some kind of historical source, and they're all referenced in the book. And I thought it was important as well to just start with a story that mentions kind of our Beothic history. We are on land that was traditionally of the Beothic people, and we live here in this place, Newfoundland and Labrador, alongside the indigenous people who were here before us, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, the Inuit, and Southern Inuit in Labrador. And so we respectfully acknowledge their history and their place in this land. Um, Collecting the stories and looking for the stories, I wanted to include a real variety of things. So I wanted to make sure that there were stories that spoke to our very varied history. Um, if you've been following social media this week, history is something that has been in the news a lot lately. We're seeing statues fall down in other parts of the world and people calling for change. I think we're at a point where we're starting to recognize just how complicated culture is and how diverse our history has been, and that people's stories haven't always been told. So I've tried to achieve a bit of a balance with this book, having stories from Labrador, stories from Newfoundland, stories from St. John's, stories from beyond the overpass, before the overpass was even thought of, and stories that represent not just our settler and our indigenous history, but also stories from our Chinese Newfoundland community, stories from the Lebanese and the Welsh, all those different people who contributed sometimes to our story, always contributed in some way to our story, but whose stories don't always get told. So I'm going to read a few of the stories, and I thought the perfect place to start would be today. That's one of the things I've been asking people as we talk about the book is I'll say, well, what's your birthday? And they'll tell me their birthday, and then I'll tell them what kind of interesting thing happened on this day. If you're joining us right now, you'll see people typing shared over in the chat section. Shauna Butler with Flanker Press is here with me tonight, and at the end of the night, we will be drawing for an ebook copy of this book. The book is now available in ebook format, so you can get it from your favorite ebook retailer, or you can go to Flanker Press's website, and all the links are there. I'll post them here as well. And we will continue to promote that throughout the night. But if you share the link, you will see that people type shared. Just share the link, type shared, and then Shauna will do the work of organizing how we draw the winner at the end of the evening. So I want to let's dive into it. Then I'm going to be switching windows back and forth a little bit here, and I wanted to start with today, because, of course, there is a story for today. And the story for today, June 10th, comes from Cape St. George, 1905, A Message in a Bottle. It was reported from Port Saunders that the Saint-Pierre banking schooner Madeleine, under the command of Captain Laflamme, picked up the following note in a bottle about 13.5 miles west of Cape St. George. The letter itself was dated to the 6th of May, 1905. The finder of this can have the best wishes for good luck and prosperity from the undersigned. Jack Sutherland of Winnipeg, Canada. James T. Freer, Captain. W. McGregor, Richard Anderson, William Melville McPherson, Edinburgh, and G. Smart. Quote, all Scotchmen trying to better their luck in Canada. Good luck till we meet again. The SS Corinthian left Glasgow the 22nd of April, 1905. So that was on this day that these gentlemen, some of them maybe not gentlemen, had thrown this bottle into the sea, and it was picked up on this day floating west of Cape St. George. So some of the stories are like that, just interesting little tidbits of stuff that happened. Now, if you know me, you know I love a story with a little bit of a spooky edge to it. And so in looking up what was happening on June 10th, June 9th, yesterday, had a very interesting sort of event that happened there as well. So on June 9th, 1897, the story is called The Skull's Curse, and it's from St. John's. A young lad discovered a round object near the top of the wall on Long's Hill, where the government of the day had been making some alterations to the cemetery. The object was covered with an accumulation of clay, and the boy and his friends used it as a football and then set it up and threw stones at it. This continued until the earth was knocked away and revealed the, quote, grinning emblem of mortality, end quote. The skull was reported to authorities, and Constable Murphy investigated. Parts of the bone had been knocked away by the stones, and Murphy gathered together what he could, placed it in a small box, and had it respectfully reburied. Later, it was reported that the boy who had unearthed the human skull had taken ill and was suffering from diphtheria. So, if you find a skull, don't throw rocks at it. That's the moral of the story. One of the criteria for picking stories for this book, I'm always a sucker for a good, discovery of a human skull story, but I also just wanted stories that talked about things that happened in the past that would have seemed very commonplace then, but today seem a little unusual. The word I wanted to I kept in my mind when I was researching stories was quirky. I wanted quirky little stories. And the stories, when I read them, I had to kind of think, oh, I didn't know about that. Or that's an interesting piece of Newfoundland and Labrador history that I had never really thought about before. So this is kind of an example of that. And it's for January 20th. From the community of Little Bay, 1887, and it's called Nar Skittles. It was a sad day for the Friends of Temperance in Little Bay as they watched the local Skittle Alley burn to the ground. The Skittle Alley had been opened by watchmaker, jeweler, and cricketing enthusiast John Lamb. Lamb had opened the business in 1883 as a combination Skittle Alley, billiard room, shooting gallery, rental space, and jewelry store. Skittles was originally an old lawn game of European origin from which the modern sport of nine-pin bowling is descended. The building had been 100 feet in length and 20 feet in breadth, and at the time of its opening it had been noted that, quote, a good deal of taste has been displayed by the builder, and the erection is quite an ornament to the place. It will thus be observed that the young people of Little Bay are not so very deficient as regards to amusements after all. Unquote. Local teetotalers had heartily approved of the business, as it had provided an alcohol-free place of entertainment for the workers at Little Bay mines. What was perhaps not as well understood by the enthusiastic Friends of Temperance was that Mr. Lamb had been bankrolled and the building had been owned by Mr. John Lindbergh, Esquire, brewer, saloon owner, and crafty entrepreneur. Owner of the Bavarian Brew Depot on Duckworth Street in St. John's, which also featured a Skittle Alley, Lindbergh had seen an opportunity and had funded the construction of the Little Bay enterprise, happy to separate leisure-deprived miners from their hard-earned cash wages. Wisely, Lindbergh had insured the building with the Phoenix Assurance Company, so he likely made a profit on the entire affair. Now, I wanted to read just another one. One of the other things that's kind of in the news lately, it's funny, people who actually kind of look at history are the ones that kind of realize that nothing new is happening in the world. It's all kind of new versions of old stories. And one of the things that has been in the news for the past couple years now is this idea of fake news, the idea that the media is maybe not always honest in telling stories, or maybe completely fabricating stories and sharing them, which then people sometimes believe to be true stories. if you've been on Facebook at all, as I know you all have, you know exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about fake news. And so this is a story from 1906, January 24th, 1906, called Whale Milk and Fake News. On this day, 1906, the Western Star newspaper in Corner Brook took to task their fellow journalists at the North Sydney Herald for presenting an outlandish story as a true piece of news. The Herald had printed a story which had started out as a joke, that a company in Ballina had started to milk the glands of feminine whales, female whales, that they were canning the product and marketing it as a new brand of condensed milk. Just fancy a whale coming on shore every day to have her milk squeezed out by machinery or human hands, exclaimed the Western Star. We thought our North Sydney contemporary was more fair-minded than endeavor to mislead its readers with such nonsense. The story had started to make the rounds the previous year, some newspapers obviously presenting it as a joke, with others, like the Herald, apparently not realizing it was fiction. The Harbour Grace Standard, for example, had in August printed an article entitled Professor Mueller's Tame Whales, which credited the story as a hot weather story, having been originally printed in the Bangor Daily News. And this is the quote from their story. Professor Mueller has succeeded in domesticating a herd of 50 sulfur-bottom cow whales and has perfected an apparatus for milking the mammoth cetaceans. The yield of milk from the full-grown whale is from 5 to 7 hogsheads a day. The milk is fresh and sweet and peculiarly rich in nutritive and medicinal qualities. It is much thicker and richer than the best Jersey milk and possesses a peculiarly pleasant and distinctive flavor which those who have tested it pronounce it superior to any known product of the lacteal variety. In spite of the debunking attempt made by the Western Star, the whale of a tale did not stop there. The St. John's Daily Star elaborated upon the urban legend in 1918, adding that Professor Mueller had trained the whales to swim around to orchestral music, as well as compete in races, tug-of-war, and water polo. The character of Professor Mueller was likely intended as a parody of a real doctor, Dr. Reismuller, a German-American chemist who had introduced to Newfoundland in 1902 a system of converting whale carcasses into fertilizer. And, in case you are tempted to add a drop to your tea, whale milk has a fat content between 35 and 50%, with a consistency more akin to toothpaste than your tin of carnation. If any of you have tried whale milk, I want you to leave me a comment there in the chat. They did need a version of Snopes. So those are kind of an example of some of the stories. And in doing this, one writer that I've been a fan of for a very, very long time was a man by the name of Charles Fort. And he was a man who was he had a profound sense of curiosity. And so around, kind of early 20th century, around the turn of the century, he had done an immense amount of research, combing through newspapers of the day and picking out weird items that kind of defied description. He was famous for popularizing or possibly inventing the word teleportation, and he was a great fan of reports of strange things that fell out of the sky, so showers of frogs and things like that. So in doing the research for this book, one of the things that I did was I would just do searches for strange things. I would try to come up with strange search terms that I could punch in and see what I would find out. So because he was interested in these showers of things, that was one of the things that I did searches for. And I found an astonishing number of strange things that have fallen out of the skies of Newfoundland and Labrador, such as on February 16th, 1888, 1888, both in St. John's and in Spaniards Bay, swarms of grubs, a myriad of grubs, appeared on the surface of the snow, covering a piece of agricultural land between Torbay Road and Portugal Cove Road, as well as in Spaniards Bay. The grubs were over an inch long and resembled a large butterfly caterpillar. Unfazed by the cold, they crawled across the snow full of vitality. According to one account, there were countless millions of those grubs on the snow and were thick as the grass in the fields. It was unknown if they had come up from the earth or had fallen from the sky. This was neither the first nor the last time this happened. 14 years previously, the same thing had happened in the same locality. Then, in January of 1941, a shower of grubs fell from the sky on a St. John's field during a snow shower, and were identified by the Newfoundland Department of Agriculture as the cutworm Noctua clandestina, not known in Newfoundland, but which could be found all over the northern US and throughout Canada. Another shower of grubs fell in St. John's at Robinson's Hill in February 1946, wriggling actively on the snow. So look to the skies. You never know what might be raining down upon you. In promoting this little event tonight, I promised a story about a dirty old man, and I said it wasn't that kind of dirty old man. This is a story from March 1st from Catalina, the champion foghorn, Green Island, Catalina. On this day, in 1883, a champion foghorn began its work on Green Island near Catalina, Trinity Bay. It was a steam-powered horn, producing its sound through the use of compressed air, and an additional water tank had to be constructed on the island to provide the needed fresh water for the steam engine. The device was housed in a wooden one-story building on a point of land northeast of the lighthouse. A notice to mariners advised that the horn would be sounded during, quote, thick weather, unquote, and snowstorms for a period of 5 seconds with intervals of silence of 35 seconds. It was estimated that the range of the foghorn would be from half a mile to 10 miles, depending on the weather at the time. The foghorn, however, had different ideas and refused to properly sound at that interval. In 1885, it was modified to sound for 10 seconds, followed by 37 seconds of silence. Possibly just as contrary was the lightkeeper himself, widower Peter Woods, who kept the station running for 25 years. In 1893, an inspector noted, "The keeper's dwelling internally is in very dirty condition. The keeper, now an old man as he gets older, is less and less attentive to cleanliness." And I'm sure all of us coming out of quarantine for a couple months can all relate to poor Peter Woods. Do you feel your spouse never notices you? This is March 5th, Harbor Grace, 1905. Take pity on Mrs. Catherine Kane, wife of James Kane of Harbor Grace. She left her house on a Thursday morning to go to the root cellar nearby to get potatoes for dinner. Thursday morning. In some way, she barred herself in. Raw potatoes were her only food for the next 3 days, and she was trapped in the cellar until the following Sunday. Her husband did not seem to be concerned at all about her absence, and when she came home, he looked up and said, "Did you get the potatoes, Kate? If you didn't turn up, I was going to go look for you tomorrow." So if you think your husband doesn't listen to you, take pity on her. Now, some of the stories in the book, I tried to keep most of the stories somewhat lighthearted and quirky, like I said, but sometimes there were stories that were a little darker. It's interesting reading the old diaries and old newspaper accounts. We think of the Victorians as being repressed about some things, but they were very open about other things, sensationalistic about other things. Lots and lots of stories about suicide, quite graphic descriptions of suicide in the early papers. Lots of unfortunate descriptions of dead children being found in various places. Lots and lots and lots of shipwrecks. And I didn't want the book to be a litany of deaths. So I tried to leave those out. But every so often I would find a story that I thought was too good not to include. So this is from March 23rd, Deer Lake, 1909. It's called Dead in the Woods. A young man named Frank Penny received the scare of his life in a disused camp of the Humber River Pulp and Lumber Company. Penny discovered the body of a man lying on a camp berth with its knees bent up and its arms folded across the breast. The body was dressed in 2 suits of underwear, 3 coats, and a heavy pair of trousers, and the stench was almost unbearable as decomposition had set in. The manager of the mill notified Judge March by wire, who, accompanied by Inspector Bartlett, Constable Quinton, and Dr. Fisher, left for the scene on the next train. On their arrival, Dr. Fisher pronounced the cause of death as exhaustion and exposure. The remains of the man, about 45 years of age, had evidently lain in the bunk for several days. The mill manager sent 5 men to assist the doctor and police in moving the body, but not one of them would handle the remains on account of superstitious fears. The police and Dr. Fisher were obliged to carry the body to the ice where a sleigh was waiting. The driver of the sleigh refused to drive the corpse, so the police took charge and the body was taken to a house and prepared for burial. And there, the mystery deepened. In the man's pockets were found numerous astronomical drawings and plans for airships, as well as an imaginative description of planets and crazy philosophical dissertations on the relations between humanity and the heavenly bodies. Another paper bore a crude likeness of himself drawn with indelible pencil and the name James R. Milliere written beneath the portrait. There was also a post office receipt issued at Summerside, PEI, indicating the deceased had sent a registered letter to the Duke of Orleans in Paris. In his pockets were found a few crusts of bread and a package of dates. The body was buried in the Catholic cemetery at Birchy Cove. The papers found on the body of the unfortunate wanderer were retained by the police, and the mystery of the man's identity and history remains unsolved. That's one for the steampunks in the audience there. That's a good story beginning for you right there. Thank you for those of you who are coming in. If you're joining us, if you share this video, if you're watching live, if you share this video and then type shared in the live chat, we're going to be doing a drawing for an ebook in a little bit after we finish our reading. So share the link, type shared, and Shauna Butler with Flanker is going to pick at random one of you to take home a copy of the ebook. And I should also probably note that because we're living in these strange times, we are launching here virtually, and we are releasing the book as an ebook. The book is out now. We'll give you the links to where you can get the ebook. For your various devices. And then in August 5th, the print version will come out, and you can all get print copies there. If you want to order a print copy of the book, if you want to pre-order, Ed Oldver, I think, is somewhere over there in the chat. Give us a wave, Ed. And if you have questions, you can probably talk to Ed about how you pre-order. You can go to the Flanker website and pre-order the print copy of the book as well, which has an amazing cover. If you haven't seen the cover art yet, it's fantastic, by Graham Blair, who's done the cover for several of my books and did all the layout for my Mummers book. Just he does amazing work. You can check him out, Graham Blair Designs, Graham Blair Woodcuts. He's often at the farmer's market. Buy his stuff. He's fantastic, great sense of humor, and I'm very, very delighted with the cover. It's very Monty Python-esque, which you know, 15-year-old me would be over the moon to know that I had a Monty Python-esque book cover out. Okay, so back to what was happening in St. John's on various dates. This is an interesting one from Conception Bay as well. Carolyn Brown's Raisins, April 4th, 1872. Under the command of Captain John Keneally, with a sealing crew of 24 men, the schooner A.T. Stone of Harbor Grace came across an abandoned vessel drifting in the ice 60 or 70 miles to the southward of Cape Chapeau Rouge. The crew succeeded in boarding her and found her to be a schooner bearing the name Carolyn Brown. Upon further examination, they found that her hatches were open and that she had been stripped of sails, rigging, and provisions. Her masts and anchors were gone, and she had several feet of water in her hold from a continuous leak. The crew of the A.T. Stone patched the leak as best they could, jury-rigged a mast with materials from their own ship, and fastened a tow line to the Carolyn Brown. 9 sailors were put on board the Carolyn Brown, and at the risk of their own lives, they towed her back to St. John's, where the crew of the A.T. Stone claimed salvage rights. It was discovered that the primary cargo of the ship was raisins. Boxes upon boxes of raisins from Spain's Costa del Sol. These delicacies were auctioned off upon the return of the A.T. Stone, much to the delight of local cooks and bakers. Historiographer H.F. Shortis remembered, "I was a boy at the time, and you can readily imagine the excitement in the old town when the news went round. There was no scarcity of raisins in Conception Bay for the next 2 years, and figgy duff was the order of the day from the highest to the lowest. I can well remember Alexander Clift, the auctioneer, selling those raisins in large or small lots, and they went as cheap as 2 cents per pound. As everyone knows, the Malaga raisins are the finest quality to be had anywhere, and the 9-crown raisins were as large as figs." My coworker is under my seat here, wanting some attention. And my other coworkers over there also wanting some attention. Now, this was also another interesting one here that I did a little more research on. Some of the stories came like just fully formed. Some of them I had to do a bit of digging. This is one that I had to do a little bit more digging on. September 29th, 1905. Not your average tourist. A dapper, intelligent-looking gentleman, dressed in the latest New York fashions and speaking with, quote, an enviable American accent, disembarked from the SS Sylvia and presented a local reporter with his card and a fragrant Havana cigar. This was Mr. Jonathan Chickenick, who with his companion Mr. Hellenic Evansik was heading to Hebron to spend a winter vacation. 7 years previously, Chickenick, only speaking 20 words of English, along with 9 other Inuit, had gone to Buffalo, New York, where they were paid $2.50 a day to operate the Eskimo exhibits. This was possibly the, quote, Eskimo village, unquote, at the Pan American Exposition held in Buffalo in 1901, famous for being the location of the assassination of United States President William McKinley. Chickenick had run a number of operations in Buffalo and was returning to Labrador flush with dough to escape the heat and to do some walrus hunting. And I went looking because the Pan American Exposition was a very well documented event, and the Library of Congress in Washington had a series of photographs showing the Eskimo village, and including an Inuit family who may very well have been either Mr. Chickenick or Mr. Evansik. And in the book, that photograph is there. Kind of a remarkable story of these this family and men from Labrador who were sent to run this village at the World's Fair. one of the stories that's in the book that I kind of loved, I was talking about how I went looking for things, looking for showers of whatever that fell from the sky. And this particular story, I'm indebted to the late George Jones, not the singer George Jones, but my late father-in-law George Jones, who had told me a story once about an uncle of his who had been preserved in salt on the Labrador and then shipped home. So as I was doing research, I thought, I'm gonna look for preserved in salt and just see what I could find, or bodies in salt. And there were an astonishing number of Newfoundlanders who died on the Labrador and who were packed in salt for the voyage home. So this is one from 1908. The sealing ship Algerine arrived in port with a dead man on board. The unfortunate man had been working before the bow of the ship on March the 29th. When he jumped on the ice, an ice pan was suddenly thrust upwards in the floe ahead of the ship. The man was pinned between the sheets of ice, which moved with such force they cut off the poor fellow's 2 legs. He died shortly after, and the body was placed in a coffin and preserved in salt for the return journey. I'm going to do maybe just 2 more. One little quick one here, which I just thought was kind of delightful in a weird kind of way. For May the 14th, 1896, from St. John's, and I've called it The Lost Art of Letter Writing. 13-year-old Bella Perrell was arrested for sending notes, quote, of a most revolting and obscene character to a woman named Mrs. Beck, who had received 3 of the letters in one day. Bella had been in service to Mrs. Beck, and when she left, she had taken one of her employer's hats, and references in the letters to this hat led the police to make the arrest. Bella denied the charges. Sadly, no record of the letters' contents remain. I would have loved to have read them. And this is one I think I'm gonna end with, because I like things that I find to be a little quirky in some way. And so this is one from Topsail in 1869, from May 26, 1869, and it's called Beware the Velocipede. Curious citizens witnessed the first ever velocipede ridden in public in Newfoundland. Mr. R.H. Earl ventured on his bicycle to Topsail and beyond before returning to St. John's. There were apparently some doubts about the safety of this new kind of conveyance, and a few days later, the Patriot and Terra Nova Herald printed the following cautionary tale, a parody of a popular folk ballad, and it's entitled The Velocipede. Lord Lovell he stood by the garden gate with his shining velocipede, and whispered farewell to his Lady Belle, who wished for his lordship good speed, 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 who wished for his lordship good speed. When will you be back, Lord Lovell, she said, but he gave her question no heed, placed his feet in the stirrups, and galloped away on his famous velocipede, peed, on his famous velocipede. Then Lady Belle cried in frantic alarm, "What a monster my lord is indeed, to ride thus away from his loving young wife on that horrid velocipede, peed, on that horrid velocipede." Lord Lovell returned, broken-hearted and sore, broken-armed, and alas, broken-kneed, for he struck on a post, nearly gave up the ghost, and smashed his velocipede, peed, and smashed his velocipede. Remember the fate Lord Lovell hath met. Let this be your warning and creed. Stay at home with your wife for the rest of your life, and beware of the velocipede, peed, beware of the velocipede. From 1869. And that's it, I think, for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Does anyone have any questions before we do a draw for the ebook version of the book? Does anyone have any questions they want to ask about the book or stories or velocipedes? I'm going to ask Shauna to do her magic, and she is going to pick out from the names of the people who have been typing shared in the comments a winner for our book. And oh, and hello to Jerry. Thanks, Jerry. I didn't see you there earlier when I was listing off all the flanker people. How many stories are in the book? 365. 365 stories. One for every day of the year. One of the other questions was best two things that happened on the same day, so you left something out. You know, this is the fascinating thing. As I was writing this book, there were so many good stories. This was, I think, for me, this was the most fun I've had writing a book because I just kept finding these gems of stories. Um, and there were so many duplicates that I've started putting them all into a volume a volume two. So the book isn't even out in print yet, and I've already started on volume two just because there are so many very good stories. And I can't even think right now about um, one of the ones that was too which I couldn't include in this particular book. But like lots of UFO stories. There's a lot of stuff that are coming out of declassified American documents about UFO stories. So there's a couple UFO sightings in this book, and I know I had extra ones of those, and those are being carried over into the next book. Uh, Sherry asks, what event or story started this career of yours? I don't know. My mom is here somewhere in the chat. Maybe that's a question for my mom. I don't know what started this career of yours. I've always loved stories. I've always loved um, writing stories, and I've always loved history. Um, I think there were two kind of formative events in my early life that kind of set me on a path towards kind of history and heritage and archaeology. One was when I was 5 years old. My mom and dad took me, and I think my cousin Tanya, I think, took us to the Royal Ontario Museum. And I remember the dinosaur exhibit, and just there was a diorama of a paleontologist working at the bottom of this excavation. And I decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that person. And then a few years later, the Tutankhamun, the King Tut exhibit, traveled the world. And I went and saw that, and I was obsessed with ancient Egypt and Egyptian mythology and all that kind of stuff. And it was the 70s, and I have a very good memory of owning, I think mom's going to correct me on this, a blue, I think, baby blue turtleneck sweater with like a glittery glow on decal, iron on decal of the King Tut's death mask. And I'm pretty sure I wore that thing out. I wish that I had it today because it was amazing. And so maybe those things are two of the events that kind of got me started on this career. Okay, and Shauna has drawn our winner. So our winner of the ebook is Nancy Tarrant. So Nancy, give us a wave if you're there, and let us know. We'll put you in touch with Shauna there, or Ed, or Peter, or someone who's here from Flanker Press tonight, and we will make certain that we get you that ebook copy. If you would like to buy an ebook copy of the book, you can go to Flanker. I'll put the links on the Dale Jarvis page. You can, if you haven't done so yet, give me a like the Dale Jarvis storyteller and author page, and I'll put all the information there as well. Krista Hart, I miss your smiling face as well. We have to do a library thing when we're allowed to do library things. Again, we'd love to do a reading of this book. And I'm sure we're going to be doing some more events coming up. Once everything is kind of back up and open, we'll be announcing probably an in-person reading of some kind, and how you can get the book. August 5th. Put that on your calendar, and you can get a copy of the print book. If you want to pre-order, you can go do that through Ed Oldford or the Flanker Press website. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, volume two is already in the works. If you come across a weird little story, I think Katie Crane might be in the audience here tonight. One of the books in the story is one that she actually found and sent to me, an amazing story that I couldn't go into too much detail in the book, but is a book on its own about a man found buried at the crossroads at Rollins Cross with a stake through his body. So you'll have to get the book and learn more about that. Um, so that's it. Thank you all very 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 much. Um, so Nancy, get in touch with Shauna. Is my mom there? What years does the book cover? What's the earliest and latest? Oh, Joy, that's a really excellent question. The earliest one, there's definitely a couple stories there from the 1500s. There is a story in there about Saint Brendan, so that's probably like 500 or something AD. Um, those are sort of the earlier ones. There's some stories there from the 1600s. A lot of the stories kind of cluster around kind of late Victorian up until the 1920s and 30s. There are some more recent stories. There's like one or two stories that happened in the 2000s. I just love the Victorian Edwardian period. I think St. John's was just must have been such an interesting, colorful, smelly, complicated place. In the period before and after the Great Fires, and I just kind of love that. I love that time, and so a lot of the stories are from that time period, just because that's, I don't know, this is stuff that I love. Tanya King Lacey, I don't know how old. Must have been like 5, so I don't know how old you were. I have no idea if you remember going with me as a kid to the Royal Ontario Museum. But that was one, and definitely, there's my cousin is here. Awesome. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any other questions that people have. What is the earliest, latest? Yeah, that's probably the time. Lara Maynard had King Tut's head on the wall in the rec room. Very 70s indeed. Very, very 70s. And thank you, Chris. I'm glad you're 9 and 10-year-old. I think this is probably an okay book for for younger kids. There's some bodies and whatnot. Um, I remember being younger than I am now, and reading the newspaper. My folks would get the newspaper, and I can remember seeking out in the newspaper the "What Happened on This Day" column. I always thought that was fascinating. What had happened on this day in the past. Um, so yeah, start kids young. Like, kids know what they like, and if they are interested in interesting, weird little stories, go for it. Great, we'll have a future folklorist there. Available in stores. Brad, this book is not yet available in stores, but August 1st. Ed might be able to better answer that than I can. But the print copy, August 1st, first week of August, and then it'll be out in all your favorite retailers, who hopefully will all be open and up and running at that point. August 5th. Yeah, okay. Only one use of the word arsehole in the book. Yep. Only one. We'll go for two in volume two. The reflection, look, an alien ghost. You never know. All right. Well, I think that's it for us. Congratulations again to our winner, Shauna. I'm hoping that you have gotten that person, and we'll get in touch with them. Stay tuned. We'll be doing more stuff. I'm always looking for stories. I'm always interested in stories. So if you have something, um, not necessarily spooky or supernatural, but I'm always interested in kind of locally interesting tales. I'm doing a project right now on the Bacaloo Trail, which is everywhere from kind of Holyrood up Conception Bay north and back around, back down to Whitburn. where we're kind of just looking for interesting stories and interesting people. Natalie Dignam, who is working with us on the project, she's doing a whole project of her own where she's doing a podcast. We're always looking for interesting stories from that region that we can share. I'm always interested in people who are making interesting things. One of my current searches are for hat makers in the province. If you know anyone who made hats, if you had an auntie or a great aunt or a grandmother who was a milliner, I would be really interested in talking to you because I don't know if anyone's really done a lot of work, research on hat making as a tradition in Newfoundland. So that might be book, 13 or something, Hat Makers of Newfoundland. Thank you all. And keep safe, tell stories, and be nice to each other. And remember that history is complicated and messy, and it's never as easy as it is in a meme. There's lots of stuff happening in the world right now. Just kind of be critical of your news sources, and yeah, be nice to people. All right. Good night. See you later.